Welcome to DejaVue, your favorite Vue podcast. You maybe just don't know it quite yet. I am Michael, and I'm here with Erik Hanchett, who is a senior developer advocate at AWS. He's also got this awesome YouTube channel. He talks about Vue and all things related to Vue. He's also an author, content creator. He gives talks at conferences, which is where we initially met last year. And, just an all-around great guy. And so glad to have you here, Erik. How would you describe yourself to people? If you're talking to your mother-in-law, how would you describe what you do for work?
Thanks for having me on, Michael. Appreciate it. Now, that's a good question. I would say I would describe myself as someone who teaches code and teaches people about what we have to offer at AWS, but I really think myself as an educator like yourself. So I like to educate people on software best practices, software development best practices, Vue.js. I've definitely branched out a little bit into more than just Vue, doing React and Angular and all sorts of things. So yeah, an educator probably would be a good term to describe me. I also, like you said, I love to go to conferences. So I've gone to several this year, given lots of different talks. So that's also been a fun part of my job as well. I feel like my job as a developer advocate is kind of a weird mix between a software developer. I did software development for over 10 years, doing back-end, front-end, doing Vue, Angular, React, and a little bit of marketing too, but it's more focused on like the educating and the software development piece at where I work.
Nice. That sounds very similar to how I would describe myself and what I do. Education is probably the easiest term for it. If I'm going through customs at an airport, I just say I'm a software developer because that's doesn't invite very many follow-up questions. But I also, it's fun. I get to do some coding. I get to do some writing. I get to, go conferences and all that other stuff, which is fun.
Yeah, that I didn't even know for the longest time that there was this position called Developer Advocate. You might hear it called Developer Evangelism at other places, but it's literally a job made for people who love to just talk to people, create content, educate, go to conferences. And when I found that position was available at AWS where I work, I was like, wow, this is awesome. I went for it, and it definitely fit in well. It especially fits in well for people like us who have this passion to teach. You don't get to do some of the fun things you get to do, like create podcasts and courses. It's not that. At least not my position. I don't create courses, but it's definitely, I create a lot of demos and a lot of different pieces of content, and occasionally we'll deep dive into more advanced topics, of course, as well.
Do you find that because you're spending so much time creating smaller demos for, to showcase like one thing here, one thing there, do you find that you miss like that really deep technical problem solving where you're like, spending 2 days just struggling through like a Webpack configuration or, some weird little edge case or something that's like happening or even like refactoring part of a code base that you don't really need to refactor demos because they're so small most of the time, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't get into as much of that day-to-day grind as I used to. So in a normal software development team, you might have a sprint that lasts a week or two, and then you have a number of points, and then you have a special task that you have to do, and you have to go through it. And I love those days where whatever, I had 5 points in this one task, and I knew it was going to be really hard, and I have to deep dive into it and get into a lot of technical details, and then submitting a pull request and getting feedback from others. I don't get that as much. I do get a little taste of that, though, because we do have something called friction logs. So oftentimes our software developers will create some really nice new features, and then I kind of get to go in and almost like doing a code review, but not really. I'm not looking. It's more like black box testing almost, but I kind of get to go in and test out the feature, tell the developers, the product managers, like, hey, I like this part didn't work. And sometimes it's so early on, like things aren't working right. So I have to kind of use my troubleshooting part of my brain to be like, okay, why isn't this working? Okay, do I need to configure this a different way? Is there a bug in the software? And luckily, a lot of our things that we do, and at least the department I'm in, is open source. So I have in the past like deep dived into the code and looked at it. Occasionally, I have pushed up pull requests still just for fun for small little bug fixes, features, docs, and done that as well. So I get some of that, but not as much as probably some of the listeners that are listening today do. Although I don't miss everything with that process. Anybody who's been on a software development team knows that there are oftentimes tight deadlines and you have to kind of work over, and the point system isn't always accurate, and dealing with crazy code reviews and going back and forth and delaying processes. That part I love sometimes, and then I didn't love other times. So I'm glad I don't have to deal with that in a day-to-day basis. And I get to have different problems. Like I put out 5, what they call CFPs, comment for papers, for 5 different conferences. And now I have to deal with, okay, when I create this conference talk that I want to submit to this conference to hopefully get picked, like how do I figure out like what the best talk is for the audience? Like what can I get for a catchy title? What can I put for a catchy description? And then how do I submit it on time? Because there's so many conferences every year and they have all these different dates. And so I'm focusing in that part. And then when I get accepted from one of them, I'm like, how do I make the best talk I can? How do I make something interesting that the attendees will really get something out of? So then that often takes a lot of deep diving into a technology. Like just the other day, I looked into Nuxt. Well, I've done this talk a couple of times, but I looked into Nuxt server components, which is an experimental feature. And I was like, okay, how do I tell this story the best way? And I was really looking into it. I even contacted Daniel Rowe. I'm sure he's been a guest in this podcast, right? Yep. And a few other people. And I was asking questions. Nice thing about being in this Vue community, everybody's so welcoming and nice and able to message you on Twitter if you DM them or email them. Everybody's really cool. And so now I got to deep dive into that topic more. And actually, I saw how it's been evolving the last 6 months too. And that was really cool. And then putting it together in a presentation. And then I give the presentation. That's a whole like new set of different things I have to do.
Yeah. It's interesting what you say, because it's like the grass is greener on the other side. And really it's just like trade-offs. You're trading one set of problems for another set of things. And yeah, I wouldn't say that like everything about what I'm doing now is like all better than when I was doing development every day, but it's different. And there was a point where I kind of got tired of, fixing these little bugs. It's like, oh, okay, there's like the CSS thing that's like annoying. It's not really that interesting. It's just like another, Flexbox thing or whatever. Or these like really technical things where you're just like, smashing your head against the wall for like 3 days and not making any progress. And like you've gone to all of the Stack Overflow posts and the Reddit posts and the GitHub issues, and you've read them all like 7 times trying to find the answer for this thing, and you can't figure it out. And like, that is so frustrating. And I got to a point where I was just like, I want to do something a little different. And so, yeah, now I get to do something different. But like you say, like there's a whole other process. And, public speaking, as most people are aware, is not the most fun thing all the time. And it can be really scary. And it took me a long time to even get comfortable on stage. And now I'm a lot more comfortable on stage speaking, but it's still exhausting. It's like, that 20-minute talk is like all I can do that day, and then I'm done. And it's like, I need a nap. And,
Yeah, I definitely feel I'm with you. Just right after you get to talk, like all that weight's off your shoulders, and you're like, okay, now I can really focus on the rest of the conference. That's fun. Yeah. For those who've never been a speaker at a conference, it's a lot different experience than being an attendee, because we have a time and a date that we need to hit, and we need to have our whole deck presentation ready before that time. We have to have it polished. And then oftentimes, like going to other people's talks before your talk, it's kind of hard sometimes to pay attention because you're like, okay, did I get my slides ready? I think you're probably like me, made like tweaks and updates to your slides all the way up to just maybe an hour or something before you get on stage.
Yeah, I'm either tweaking my slides and like rehearsing it a bit more, or I am like, I don't want to expend my mental energy by like focusing on the previous talks and like, oh, how I'm going to learn this new stuff. Like as an attendee, it's exhausting enough, but like I've got to do some other stuff after that. Right. So I usually don't go to previous talks before my presentation because I'm just trying to like, I want to stay as mentally fresh as possible because, you know, there are 500 or more people in the audience and they've paid money and they've come in from all over to see the different people give their talks and to see me give my talk. And so I want to make sure that that 20 minutes that I'm up there is the best that I can possibly do. So yeah, it's a very different experience. And yeah, so if you see people at conferences, if you see the speakers and they're not around and you don't see them very much, then that's probably why, because they're like mentally drained and recovering in their hotel room.
or tip, there's usually like a speaker room somewhere where all the speakers hang out, sometimes before and sometimes after their talks. So if you kind of know where that is, if you're in the know, you could probably just wait until one of the speakers walk out of that.
Yeah, usually tweaking their slides, or I've had before where I watched someone else give their talk, or I was just talking to someone beforehand, and then I was like, oh, I should change that in my talk. Or, oh, wait, that's wrong. I need to fix that. And yeah, so there's always like last minute things going on.
Yeah, I remember we were in the speaker room for Vue Toronto, which you don't know is an amazing conference, happens every year in kind of like November timeframe in Toronto. I think the room we were in didn't have enough plugs on the wall. So everybody was like looking for a plug to plug in their laptop. People were sitting on the ground in a corner, just plugged in like you were at an airport or something.
Yeah.
And you found a plug. And that I remember distinctly having in the speaker room that happening. One thing nice about speaker room, they usually also give us snacks and sugar. So it kind of gives us a little more energy while we're waiting for our talk.
Yeah, or there's usually something not too far away. You can like buy some donuts or something. So your job at Amazon right now at AWS, so you're a senior developer advocate, and I've seen this term used a lot: developer relations, developer advocacy, and it seems to be kind of like one of those terms that's a bit nebulous and has a different definition based on like every company you go to has their own version of what this looks like. Sometimes it's writing documentation or tutorials. Sometimes it's like almost like talking with the customers and understanding their needs and bringing that back to the team developing the API or the developer tools. And like you say, putting together demos and giving feedback, early feedback on tools and going to conferences and stuff. So like you're in this world more than I am. I'm just observing from the outside. So can you maybe talk a bit about that? Like what in your mind is developer advocacy, and like, are there different facets of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we kind of touched on a little bit on this before, but yeah, we can expand a little bit. So developer advocacy usually, like you said, it changes per company. I have a friend that works as a developer advocate for Discord, and his advocacy is almost all docs. So he doesn't do what a traditional developer advocate does. So he has a different take on it. So he's always going into the docs. We've been talking about kind of the basic demos, but he's been creating like pretty advanced demos, getting them linked into the documentation, trying all the different APIs and all the different API docs. And he talks about it quite a bit. He has a podcast too. That's like one type of developer advocacy. But the ones I typically see, they kind of fall into three buckets. One is they create content. So you create blog posts, you create videos, you create shorts, Instagram Reels, TikToks, LinkedIn posts. So your job is to just create content, and that could be like 1 or 2 pieces of content a week, or 1 piece of content a week. Usually more than one is kind of difficult for most people. When I was full going on with my YouTube channel program with Erik, I tried to do 3 a week, and that was really, really, really hard
That sounds
to get out 3 videos. But it's even harder when you work at a corporation and the videos have to be vetted, and you have to check for quality and have to re-record things. So that's one of the avenues. Another is that you're kind of doing that's more like inbound, I suppose, because you're just putting content out there. You might tweet about it, you might promote a little bit, but it's mostly like letting the SEO algorithms of YouTube and Google and everywhere else to find you. And then the kind of second one is kind of outbound, where you're going to conferences. So that's like we were just speaking before, where you're applying for all those CFPs, like I was mentioning, and you're going to these conferences, giving talks, and also sponsoring events. So that could be going in and I had a table at that conference, which is a really cool conference, like near in Wisconsin. It's kind of a little bit of JavaScript, .NET, had a bunch of different tracks. And we had a table set up, and I was talking all about AWS Amplify, which is the product I do the senior developer advocacy for. And so we talked to all sorts of developers, Vue developers, React developers, all of them. And it was just more like getting the word out about like, hey, there's this thing called AWS Amplify. We're a set of tools to help front-end developers create full stack apps. We have a hosting service, like things like that. We would just kind of give out a lot of information. And then there are people who work in this developer advocacy world. That's all they do. Like they just travel from one conference to the other to the other. And typically, like in the past, that's what developer advocates did, is they would be the road warriors. They would be gone 48 out of the 52 weeks a year, just going to one conference to the other. And especially pre-COVID, I saw this more often because there were so many conferences. And now since COVID hit, I feel like, especially in the United States, the conference scene has slowed down a little bit. It's definitely, I don't think it's 100% to where it's at before. Some conferences went out. It's a lot of meetups. I was just at a React New York City meetup, and they told me this was the first React New York City meetup since COVID. So it's been like 3 years, and they're still like slowly coming back.
Yeah.
I think attendance is down a little bit in some places and up in other conferences.
Yeah, that's interesting what you mentioned about the road warriors, because I have seen that before where, yeah, not as much in the last few years, but before for sure, where people would just conference to conference to conference. And then I think that that's really difficult too. It's really taxing, and like, you know, it takes a certain kind of person to be able to do that kind of a thing, you know? It's like the traveling salesman kind of deal where you're just like living out of hotels and out of your suitcase and, you know, racking up them airline points.
Yeah, exactly. That's what probably 5 years ago, that's what developer advocacy was for a lot of orgs, a lot of companies, was that kind of get on the road every week. What's really changed, I think, in the last 5 years since COVID is that a lot of companies started looking at these online events. A lot of companies started saying, well, maybe we could just focus on content. And so it's shifted a little bit. There's still plenty of conferences. There's still plenty of people and companies that are sponsoring it, including AWS Amplify, where I work at. But I feel like it's not always like that for every company to do that. Personally, myself, I like to mix in a little bit of the content and traveling. So I don't travel every single week, not even close. I try to do it maybe once every month or two to go somewhere and travel. So that's kind of my cadence. Some orgs are going to be different. Some places are going to want more travel than others. And then the third kind of leg of this stool, and I kind of, by the way, if you've heard this before, there's a great developer called Swix. He's really in the AI space right now. And he wrote a really great blog post years ago about his ideas in developer advocacy. And the third was like product, is like you're the guy that really goes out and gets feedback from customers, what they like, what they don't like about the product. And then you also give your own opinions on the product, because typically most developer advocates are previously been usually developers or maybe senior developers like me. So we usually know what kind of feels right and what doesn't feel right because we're selling tools to other developers. So we should know like how it feels and how it doesn't feel and what a good developer experience and what is not. So we're usually pulled in early in the product process to test out, not like a QA, but more of like, here, let me try this out as a developer focus. So we'll do like these friction logs, or sometimes they're called like reviews, and we'll just review the new product and give feedback. And then when we're out and talking to customers, sometimes we do customer interviews. Sometimes we'll just be at a conference and be like, hey, have you used this? Oh, yeah, I like this, but I had a problem here. Then we'll give that back to product. Oftentimes it's online. So it's like GitHub issues or it's Discord office hour. Like we have a Discord office hour and a whole Discord server. So we'll look through there and look through feedback from customers. And if we find some really interesting tidbits, we'll pass that on to product and then they can help prioritize that. So that could be a whole job unto itself, is just dealing with product. Usually the product managers at a lot of companies deal that too, but we're kind of like an extra layer of feedback for them.
Sounds like a lot of different roles potentially. So I imagine that some companies have it set up so that maybe there are 3 distinct roles. Maybe there's one person doing all 3 things. And yeah, I kind of like that variety. That's one of the aspects that I like about what I'm doing now is that I basically get to do all of these things. Like I develop my own products, which are courses and things. And so then I'm trying to get feedback from people on like, oh, how was this tutorial? How was this course? How was, all these things. So I am doing all 3 of these things for myself in addition to the coding and stuff. And I really like that variety, but I imagine there are people who prefer to just, stick with one hat and keep that on the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. You can definitely go in all 3 directions or a completely different direction. Like I said, with my friend who's doing more docs. Yeah. I guess you could say docs would be like a 4th part of this for some companies. They don't have like dedicated document management people. And then sometimes developer advocates end up having to be the people that update the docs, that do the information management of it and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely different ones. My job in particular, I kind of balance between all 3 of those ideas. I try to get a piece of content out. I have whole plans of content I want to create out for the next month or 2. I have multiple conferences, not so many. I'm trying to wind down my conference speaking and schedules for the rest of the year. I only have maybe 1 or 2 trips planned for the rest of the year. And then we have some new stuff coming out. So I'm always like getting involved in that and trying to give my feedback. So it's a pretty fun job. I like having that. I know some people, it drives them crazy because you kind of have to figure out like what you want to do. And some people like to be told what to do. Me too. Sometimes I like to be like, hey, this is what you need to do. And some people like to not be told what to do. And some people don't know what to do. But it just depends on kind of your personality and what you like and what that works like.
Yeah, it's really interesting how flexible this job can be. So for people who are listening and are considering maybe this kind of a role might be for them, how do you get into this kind of a position and what kind of experience do you need in development? Do you need development experience? Do you need a lot of experience? Or like what kinds of things do you think people are looking for when hiring for these roles?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say having experience as a software developer is important, but it isn't always required. There are some companies that are looking to hire people that have little experience in software development, but maybe they're great at writing, they're great at talking, and they can kind of learn on the job. I think if you want to give yourself kind of these quote unquote unfair advantages that you hear that sometimes people talk about, like being deeply technical, having a software development background is definitely going to put you above other candidates. But I would say also being comfortable writing, being a good writer is important. Being comfortable, especially for a lot of roles now, video is becoming more and more important. Being able to talk in front of a camera, maybe put out a few YouTube videos just to kind of get the the feel of doing it. Being able to create presentations. I've heard of a lot of developer advocate roles where the first thing they do is they'll be asked to give a presentation on a certain topic. And maybe it's a topic of a technology that the company has. It's a skill. A lot of us did it in high school and maybe in college, had to put together presentations, but it's to get good at that and to make something visually appealing and keep the audience awake. It's a skill. So practicing that would be important. Maybe create some, once again, maybe YouTube videos or a blog post where you put all your ideas down would be helpful. And that's quite a bit of what I would do to prepare. I would definitely, if it's a lot of the job postings describe the people they're looking for. So they'll be like, you need to have XYZ technologies. You need to be familiar with web development. You need to be familiar with React development, things like that. So pay close attention to those. Make sure you have time and make sure you understand those technologies. I'm just going to throw this out there. If I was like brand new and I was like right out of college or right out of high school and I wanted to get into this profession, I would create a YouTube channel just like you and me have done. Like I would start posting videos weekly on fun topics that I want to teach to others. I would try to work full time as a software developer. So I would get that experience at the same time and work in the industry just to make sure I understand how a sprint works, how I get pull requests up, those basic things, how I deliver features, how I get into whatever, let's say it's web development. I'm doing CSS, HTML, JavaScript. I'm learning Vue. Maybe it's a Vue company. So, and then as I'm learning, I would go back and I would write a blog post on it. I would write, I'd create a YouTube video on it. I think those things will really, really help you in this industry.
Yeah. And on the content creation side of things, I often try and encourage people, like if you want to, or you're thinking about putting out stuff, just do it. You don't have to, like the first things you do are probably not going to be good because I mean, you're new at it. And it's like awkward at first because you don't know, like if you're writing an article, like you don't know how to even begin. How do you outline an article? How do you go from the beginning to the end? Or for a video, how do you even like record or talk in front of a camera without being weird and awkward? And how do you edit it? And all of these things. So like my advice would always be, you know, that the first 5 to 10 things you put out, like don't even worry about the quality necessarily. Just like you were saying, do a weekly cadence, just get something out. And it doesn't really matter how long it is or how good it is. It's just like going through those steps again and again. And by the 5th time, you'll be like, oh, well, this part was really hard, or that part, you know, I rewatched the video and that sucked, so I can improve it there. And like, but it's hard to think about making it good when your entire brain capacity is consumed with like, how do I talk on camera? And that's something that took me a long time. Like even after I had been writing and putting blog posts out, then speaking on camera was a whole new thing to learn, and speaking publicly on stage, yet another skill. And even for this podcast, I don't think anyone knows this, but me and Alex, we started recording podcast episodes in December of last year. And we thought we were recording the first few episodes, and the plan was to like, okay, we'll get to like 5 episodes and then we'll like have a bit of a backlog before we launch it. But then when we got to those 5 episodes, we realized these 5 episodes are complete garbage and we can't release these because they don't make any sense. And, you know, we were just trying to figure out like, how do we do this podcast thing? How do we use these recording tools and all that stuff? So like both Alex and I have a lot of experience in content creation. He's got this awesome YouTube channel he's been posting videos on for a long time and giving talks and workshops and stuff like that. And, you know, even for us, this whole new medium of podcasting and how do me and Alex do the whole back and forth and all that stuff, that took us many attempts to even just kind of like work out the kinks and the rough edges and to like get to a place where it was like, we're okay with having other people see this now.
Yeah, definitely. I could see just watching your guys' podcast. It sounds like, and it looks like you're much more polished and people don't see all the hard work you did to kind of get that chemistry going and keep trying over and over again. No, I love those tips that you said, 100%. It's really hard, like when you're first starting to learn something, put yourself out there and do those things. But yeah, you just got to realize no one starts. Everybody has a certain amount of natural talent. Maybe you have some crazy natural talent that the first time you get on camera, you're just this charismatic and funny and interesting. And first time you create a tutorial, you make a perfect tutorial. But I think most people just have to kind of grind through it and just get more comfortable and try it over and over again and get feedback. That's interesting.
The number one piece of feedback that I've gotten, especially on videos, is that I don't speak fast enough, or I'm not, I don't know, interesting enough or charismatic enough. And that is like, that's something I've worked a lot on over the years. And I don't know how far I'll actually get. Like, I'll never be like a news anchor. Like, I'm just not that kind of, like, I'm not a radio host. I don't know if I have that personality to be there. I'm not like one of those like typical super extroverted fast talkers, and so it's not the thing that I'm naturally gifted with. So it's taken a lot for me to, even get to this point. And I feel like there's a lot for me to learn yet still. But the writing side of things is something that I've been more comfortable with, like, from the beginning, and that didn't feel as hard for me to learn. And so I think, there is something there of like, some people might find being on camera easier than writing, or writing easier than being on camera, or whatever. And so, pick what you like, or just, I guess, plow through the hard part if you want to get there. So,
no, I feel you 100%. It's, writing's definitely a great option too. I'll give you a little anecdote from what you just said. And I remember doing the first podcast interviews and either being a podcast host or interviewing. There was an old podcast on Vue that I won't get into the details of, but I did a co-hosting job on there for a little bit. And I remember it took me quite a while. I was super awkward. There was getting used to just talking in front of the microphone, that is, and talking to people. And it took me a while. I went on one of the first podcast interviews I did. This wasn't the one I hosted. This was a different podcast. I don't want to name drop, but he was a pretty big guy in the CSS world. And he used to have a podcast where he would interview like experts in different web technology. So he had like Evan Yu on once, and he had a bunch of other people on. And I had created a course on Nuxt, and this was years ago. And this was like, I don't remember what version Nuxt is, 2.1. I don't remember. It's really old. And I had just pitched him. I just emailed him out of the blue, this huge guy in the CSS world. Everybody would know his name if I mentioned it. And he said, yeah, sure, come on. Let's talk about Nuxt and your course. I'm like, cool. So I went in and I researched I had never done like an interview like this before. It's kind of brand new to him. Like, how do I do this? And I was listening to this other one, and he's like, oh, I listened to this other podcast, and they're like, oh, one good way when you go into someone else's podcast to get people interested in the product that you're trying to sell is to give a discount, like put a specific URL, like blah, 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 / this podcast host's name.
right.
And so I get on the podcast, and I'm like, he's asking me questions about Nuxt, and I'm answering it. And then I noticed that he's just going through the API and the Nuxt docs and just asking me and quizzing me questions. And like, it got increasingly harder questions. And I brought up the docs, and I was just answering the questions. And then halfway through, I'm like, I think you're just kind of reading off through the docs API. And he's like, oh, well, yeah, I'm just trying to get an idea what this is about. So it was kind of an awkward interview. And then at the end, I'm like, hey, I just want to give your viewers the best chance to get my course. It's blah, 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 / your name. And he was like totally not happy with that. And at the end, we finished the podcast, and he emails me probably 2 or 3 days later. And he's like, that was a really bad podcast. I don't feel comfortable with posting it on my feed. Sorry. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Let me jump back on. He's like, no, we're not going to re-record it. So like just that experience alone,
Wow,
early on in my podcasting career was like, oh yeah, okay. First, I shouldn't call out the host if they're just looking through the API docs. B, I probably shouldn't be all salesy and try to sell my my course at the end. So I learned a lot from that, and it was just kind of a learning experience, I suppose.
Yeah, that's wild. That's and hard to take that and continue doing what you're doing. Like, yeah, good job
Yeah,
on
I feel bad.
well, good job on taking that feedback and not just being like, well, I guess I suck at this and then giving up, because I don't know. I don't know how I would have reacted to that, because I remember when I first started doing content creation, like if I had someone tweet at me that I had a typo, or like, oh, you used ref when you meant reactive, I would have just been like, that would have like ruined my day. And I would have just spent the rest of the day thinking, oh my goodness, should I even be doing this? Why do I think that I can write blog posts or teach people things? And it's just like, whoa, chill, like chill out, man. Like this, it's not that big of a deal. It's just like a small mistake, don't worry about it. And so, yeah, good job on taking that feedback and continuing from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I think at the time, yeah, just like you, with when you're early on those days, you get those criticisms, and then having someone, which I really looked up to, be like, no, I'm not going to post this podcast, and I'm not going to have you on again. It was pretty hard to swallow at the time. And I'm sure I was like a little mad, but I also knew I messed up. Like I probably should have handled the interview better, but I definitely now know a few more things to do better during podcast interviews. And by the way, I do have a new course. Let me give you the URL. I'm just kidding.
If you wanted to plug a course or anything, just go ahead,
I know different podcasts have different, this person did not want he didn't want to have anybody come on his platform and plug, but I've definitely been on other podcasts where you got to feel out the host and what's right and wrong.
Yeah, that's true. It's like, it's like when you go over someone's house, they all have different
rules,
and like shoes on, shoes off, different, can I use your oven to bake my pie, or, whatever. If I get a piece of that pie, you can use my oven. That's my rule. So you had mentioned before we hit record that you had worked at Amazon, but developing with Vue. So you'd mentioned there was some interesting things that you could talk about from that.
Yeah. So I've been at Amazon or AWS for over 3.5 years now. And for the first 2 years, I was a software engineer, basically a front end engineer. And so I got to work on a Vue project for pretty much the first year and a few months, which was really amazing, because I did my interview, part of the interview for Amazon and AWS. They ask you some leak code type questions. So you do get into like having to know those different algorithms. But there's a part of the interview, especially for front end engineers, where they kind of ask you some web technology type questions. So you get to pick which framework. Some interviewers will require you to do it just in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Others are okay if you bring in React or Vue, and it's really just a whiteboard, so you don't have an IDE or anything. And they asked me to create a web page, and I can't remember what scenario it was, but we had to like create a header at the top, and then we had to, I think I used slots, which we had to kind of break up some things. I wrote all the stuff in a whiteboard, and in this virtual whiteboard that I was in, it was all online. And I thought like, I'm doing this all in Vue. And I thought, well, this is probably the last time I'm going to be writing Vue at this job, because everyone I hear tells me that AWS is pretty much a React heavy company, and most of their divisions using it. And then they placed me into the Amplify UI team. And so the Amplify team creates a bunch of open source libraries. And one of the libraries is for Vue.js. And so a part of the job when I got there is they wanted to rewrite what's called the authenticator. This is a component that you can with just a few lines of boilerplate, you can drop onto any Vue app, and it gives you like a login, sign in, sign out, multi-factor authentication. It connects up to our Cognito service. And they're like, we have this really old version. It was using Vue 2. It wasn't compatible with Vue 3. It had some problems. And they're like, we want a newer version of this. And by the way, we have this combined library we use in the backend using XState for state management. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. So I got to deep dive in and create the authenticator using Vue, all the best practices of using a Vue 3 app. So that was really fun. And there was a couple of other guys on the team that knew some Vue, some knew Vue better than others. And I would just push up PRs every day. We were moving really quickly to try to get this out. And it was super fun working with it. And then I found out that there was other small departments at AWS that were using Vue as well. So that was really cool. So I started contacting them, and they were telling me how they were dealing with it on their internal systems. Most of them were, they didn't have open source. So we were also unique that every time I was pushing up, it was just an open source repo. And so, yeah, that was the first 2.5 years. And then I got pulled on to a project which was more React heavy. So then I got to kind of work on that side for a while. And then, but I was still, to this day, I'm still like the caretaker of our Vue code. I have a special place in my heart for it because I wrote it. And there's other people now fixing it if there's any bugs or anything that comes up with it. But yeah, that process was interesting and something I didn't think I was going to end up doing. We also got to write end-to-end test cases. We used the Vue test utils with the Vue testing library, using testing library. We try to get all the best practices. We didn't end up using everything in the Vue ecosystem, of course, but it was just kind of a fun introduction to AWS.
Yeah. So where had you been? Like, had you been using Vue beforehand? I'm guessing because you're using it in the interview.
Yes. So I have been a Vue fan for many years, all the way back. I wrote a book in 2018. You can see the little tip of it if you're watching the video version, but it's just a brown book. It's called Vue.js in Action. So I had been using Vue for a long time, usually for side projects. I think when I was writing the book, I was at a company that was using Angular. So I was writing Angular full time. And then on my nights and weekends, I was writing Vue because I just liked it.
Isn't that how all things get adopted? Is that the developers are using it on the weekends, and then eventually they manage to convince everyone else to adopt it at the company?
Exactly. And definitely, I think on that one or the next one, I got to write Vue more regularly. It's always I always picked companies based on the location at the time, because this is before I was really doing remote work. So in my local area, fortunately, all the companies were using React or Angular. So I couldn't find like a company that was using Vue like in my general area. Now it probably been like this for a while. It's the explosion of remote jobs is easier to get a Vue job. You're gonna have to search a little bit, but there's these large companies that use Vue that you could probably interview for. But back then I was just focusing locally, so I had to do it on the side mostly. And then I did get to work on some Vue projects at some future companies before I joined AWS.
So working on this authenticator library module, what were some things that you learned from that? Whether it's like technical things about Vue or things about putting together a library that other people are going to use, or open source even. Were there any interesting things that you can recall that were like interesting insights or anything like that?
Yeah. Well, first, since it is open source, that was the first time I had pushed some PRs, some other open source projects before that, but this was the first time I was like maintaining an open source project. So I found out quickly that getting contributors to an open source project for a company that has an internal roadmap is pretty hard. Like, you think of open source and think, oh, that's great. You're going to get, tons of contributors coming in and wanting to help out. And really, we didn't have that many contributors. Most people who wanted to contribute were just wanting to contribute to docs or do translations, which was great. We loved it. And occasionally someone would come in and be like, hey, I could try to fix this issue. But oftentimes we didn't have that many. And I think we've gotten better as a company and as a whole to put RFCs out and put more roadmaps out of what we're trying to work on. But we never really focused deep dive into like, okay, this is an open source project. I think we added this tag later on, but like, hey, this is a good first issue if you want to jump into our code base and start creating things. So that was kind of eye-opening to me of, even though you have an open source project, that you really have to work hard to get people to come in and contribute.
Yeah.
And you have to, it takes a lot of community focus to do that. So I guess that's the first thing I learned. Second, we were going from Vue 2 to Vue 3, and there was talks about how we wanted it to be like backwards compatible or not. And this was before, what's that Vue library that you can use that supports Vue 2 and Vue 3? So there was this library, but it hadn't been out yet. So we had to kind of make the determination, like, okay, what do we do to do the Vue 2 backwards compatibility? Vue2Me, that's the one I'm thinking of. It's a developing utility that allows you to write universal Vue libraries for Vue 2 and 3. And it's of course by Anthony Fu. So that had not, I think like 6 months into working on it, Anthony Fu released Vue2Me, which would have been able, so we could have had one library to work with Vue 2 and Vue 3. But at that point, I was already 6 months in. It would have been really hard to integrate that library in Vue2Me. And so I had to kind of tell everybody, okay, this is going to be a Vue 3 library moving on, but if you want to use Vue 2, you have to use our older library. And that was kind of a big decision to try to figure out what to do. So we didn't abandon Vue 2. They still had the older library, but all the kind of neat new things were in this new Vue 3 library. So that was kind of a trade-off that we had to think about early on. We also, writing kind of the Vue, just some of the internal stuff, like to make sure it didn't have as, usually this is a React problem, but in the Vue, the way we wrote our app and this library, we had to be really cautious and careful that we didn't have too many re-renders. So we had a few re-render issues where we ended up pulling in some other kind of, we use Vue.use, and we were pulling in some stuff from Vue.use to make sure we didn't have any re-render, especially since we're using composables, and we were trying to use composables with this X state. So that was a little tricky too.
What was the root cause of those extra re-renders?
I think it's the way we were like using I can't remember exactly, the way we were using our composable, and we had this specific state that we were pulling out of it that was grabbing from X state. We got into this weird situation where every time you typed like a letter on the input, like for the username to log in, we could see like we put a console log and there'd be like 30 console logs for every letter we put in.
Yeah.
Have you ever had that in certain scenarios?
Not in Vue, but I, like a long time ago, I remember using React, and that was definitely an issue that I ran into many times, especially on the key input. You'd notice the lag because you're typing and it takes like a fraction of a second longer for that letter to actually show up than it should. And then you realize, oh, okay, I shouldn't re-render my entire application on every keystroke. And so then you have to like do extra stuff for that. But in Vue, I've never had that issue with the extra re-renders.
Yeah, I didn't think I could get into that situation in Vue. And I proved myself wrong. Yeah, it was just a weird edge case that I ran into that took quite a bit of time. I'm looking at the code right now. I used this thing called create shared composable. I grabbed it from the Vue.use core, and I wrapped the whole composable. It was called useauth. Wrapped it in the create shared composable, and that actually decreased the number of re-renders from like that 30 or 20 from every time I pressed a key to like, 2 or 3 or 1 or 2. It was really, really low at that time. So if anybody has used create shared composable, let me know. But that actually solved the issue. So I had like weird issues like that occasionally.
That's the fun part about these bigger apps and projects versus like these little toy demo projects, is that you often get into like these weird situations that, like, I never see things like that because I'm just like, oh, let me try out Nuxt server components, and I build like a small little app for myself, and like I'm not going to find these weird edge cases and stuff like that as much as you do when you're on like these big applications with like interesting requirements and historical reasons for, oh, we we use this because that's how we have been using it, and it's too hard to change now, and all that kind of stuff.
One other thing too is I think you even wrote about this. I think just coincidentally, I was following your Twitter account and you wrote something about this. We had this issue where we needed to do slots. So we have these deeply nested components, and we needed to grab state from that deeply nested component back up the chain to the parents component. So we had these slots within slots within slots. Mm-hmm. So we had to do these weird slots within slots. And then we were also doing bringing up data back up from the slots using scope slots. So it became really kind of complicated for other developers to see. And I think now I probably could have written it better, but I remember you had that pattern too. And I think you ran into some similar issues, or you showed some examples of that. So we had to be creative in how we were dealing with slots and bringing state and data up, because we had this kind of wrapper component, had all these other things inside of it for it. I guess that's not super interesting by itself, but it's another thing we ran into.
Yeah, and I think the reason that I got into all that stuff with scope slots and nesting them and all that stuff is because at the place I was working at previously, the way in which we were writing things, it ended up being the best solution for in Vue 2 before we had composables and everything else. That was the best way to abstract some of the things that we were doing. And so then I was like, how do I do this? And then how do and then that leads you down this path. And if I hadn't have worked at that job, I probably would have never learned those things. Yeah. It's interesting, the kinds of things that you're forced to learn on the job.
Oh, one last thing is, I just remembered too, is working with a mixed team between Vue developers and React developers, and maybe have some Angular people mixed in, is that when you write your Vue code, people look at it and be like, well, why don't you just take this component and pass it into this other component and do it this way? Yeah. And you can see the Reactisms start leaking into your Vue code, and you have to be really conscious to be like, no, that's not a great pattern for Vue. I mean, we have ways to emit data back up. We don't really pass components in that. You can't really pass components in that way. We have slots. You kind of have to stand your ground. Otherwise, your Vue code could start looking like weird React code.
Yeah. We've talked about a lot of different things already in this podcast. So before we wrap up here, are there any last words you'd like to share? Maybe where we can find you, what you're up to? We'll, of course, put those things in the description as well.
No, thank you. Yeah, this has been fun. I like how we deep dived into a little bit of developer advocacy and talked a little bit about Vue. Yeah, you can reach me. My Twitter handle is Erik, CHERIKCH. And my full-time job as a developer advocate is to promote AWS Amplify. So if you haven't checked it out, you can go docs.amplify.aws. We're a hosting service, so we host all your sites. We actually worked with the Nuxt team directly to make sure that your Nuxt server-side rendered or static site generated app works with us. So you can host your site basically on AWS with Amplify hosting. It's a managed service. And we also support React, Angular, pretty much any of the frameworks out there, Next as well. So check that out, or you can even have us help you create your whole site on AWS. You don't have to be an AWS expert to do it. You just, you can actually create basically infrastructure as code in a very straightforward way and create your whole apps with us. Yeah, so check that out at Amplify or docs.amplify.aws. And then I also post on my YouTube channel, so I'll give one last plug. I haven't posted in the last probably 3 months. I have been super duper busy. This is the longest gap I've taken in many years on my YouTube channel. But I am planning to go back to it and start posting again. But I have over 600 videos, tons of Vue.js content. Most of it's still relevant, even has some AWS content on there, maybe even a little bit of React sometimes. So you can check that out at erik.video or look at Program with Erik on YouTube.
Sweet. Well, thank you for coming on, and it's been lovely to chat with you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right. And for all of you listening, check out some of our previous episodes if you haven't, and we will see you next week.